All right, strap in, everyone, because today we are going deep, deep into a world of eight-legged mayhem with eight-legged freaks.
Oh, yeah, this one is a fun one.
It's not just about giant mutated spiders, though, right? I mean, we've got T.txt here, and it's
Yeah.
got some seriously interesting stuff to dig into.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that really stands out is how the movie manages to be both a total homage to those classic B-movie monster flicks, from the 50s, but also a really clever film in its own right. It's walking this line.
Totally. It's like they took those old monster movies like Them or Tarantula,
Mm.
where something always goes wrong, radiation or some lab accident or whatever, and suddenly you got these creatures wreaking havoc.
hmm
And then they took that and they just injected it with a megadose of modern humor.
hmm
But how do they make a movie about giant spiders funny without losing its edge?
Well, I think it's that self-awareness they've got. Like, the filmmakers knew exactly what they were doing. You take that scene where the sheriff first runs into a giant spider in the mine.
Yeah.
He doesn't just, freak out. He's got this totally deadpan line. He's like, well, that's just great. Now I've got giant spiders to deal with. It's perfect. The whole movie's kind of winking at you, the audience, like they're in on the joke. But
Yeah.
then they still deliver these moments that are actually pretty thrilling.
It's true. And speaking of embracing the absurd,
Yeah.
we got to talk about the cast. I mean, you've got David Arquette leading the charge as Chris McCormick.
Of course.
And he's got that signature quirky style of his. And guess who else shows up in one of her early roles?
Oh, whoa.
Scarlett Johansson.
No way. I didn't realize that.
Yep.
That's cool.
So Arquette, I mean, he's perfect for this kind of film. It's not about subtle acting. It's about
Yeah.
going all in on the over-the-top nature of, the genre.
Right.
He knows it's a bit ridiculous. And that energy just makes the whole movie better, honestly.
It's infectious.
You know what else is great? Even the supporting characters, even though they're playing those, classic monster movie archetypes, they bring something new. You got the scientist who's, way too excited to study the mutated spiders.
Yeah.
And then there's the sheriff who's like, no way, this is crazy at first, but then he ends up being the ultimate spider slayer.
Yeah.
And even the kid who, loves spiders even before they're giant killing machines.
Right. It's all very familiar, but they do it in a way that doesn't feel stale.
Yeah, exactly. And TTXT brings up a great point about the film's understanding of B-movie tropes.
Yeah. For people who aren't as familiar, B-movie tropes are those recurring themes and characters and plot devices that you see all the time in, B-movies. Low budgets, crazy premises, and that campiness we love.
Okay, so Eight-Legged Freaks is playing with all those classic elements, but in a way that feels, I don't know, both nostalgic and smart at the same time.
Exactly.
But we got to talk about the visuals. The spiders look amazing, especially considering this wasn't a huge budget film.
It's really well done. What they do is they combine practical effects and CGI. And what's cool is they use those practical sets and even forced perspective stuff to make those CGI spiders believable.
Ooh, forced perspective. That's interesting.
Yeah. Take that scene in the mall. The way the giant orb weaver crashes through the ceiling, that looks incredible because they built a part of that ceiling to actually collapse.
Right, so it's not just throwing it all on the computer. They're using real things to give it that weight, that scale, which makes those attacks feel even more real.
Yeah, exactly. And you put that together with the CGI, which was top-notch for its time, you get these giant spiders that are both scary and kind of funny at the same time.
Okay, so we've got this movie that's a love letter to B-movies, a cast that's totally into it, and visuals that, frankly, are pretty amazing. I'm starting to see why people love this movie so much.
Yeah, it's got a lot going for it. But there's more to it than just the scares and the laughs. There are some interesting themes in there, too. They used that small-town America setting to explore this idea of people coming together and being brave, when faced with eight-legged terror.
It's like all those classic monster movies where it's the small town that has to save the day, right?
Right. And even though they don't go super deep into those themes, they're definitely there, and they add another layer to the whole thing. It's not just about the spiders. It's about ordinary people becoming heroes when things get crazy.
That's what makes it so interesting. We've got the nostalgia, the humor, the great effects, and now these themes. Eight-Legged Freaks is doing a lot right.
It really is. And we haven't even gotten to the pacing yet or all the different kinds of spiders they show. This movie keeps you going from start to finish.
You're right. Buckle up, everybody, because we're about to find out even more about what makes Eight-Legged Freaks so much fun.
Yeah, this is where it gets good. Reading through T.txt, one thing that really struck me is how Eight-Legged Freaks just never lets up.
It really doesn't. It's like a runaway train, but with spiders.
Exactly. From the moment those spiders start growing, it's just nonstop action and suspense.
But it's like good suspense. It never feels like too much, you know?
Right, and that's because the filmmakers are really smart about how they paced the movie. They keep things moving by constantly throwing new challenges at the characters.
Yeah, like that scene in the mall with the giant trapdoor spider
Yeah,
bursting up through the floor, sending people running. Pure chaos.
total chaos. But it's also incredibly well choreographed and visually stunning. They really nailed it.
Totally. And then, oh man, those jumping spiders in the mine, like little tiny terrors just bouncing everywhere.
It's like they took a spider field guide and said, let's make a movie out of this, except, with some Hollywood exaggeration thrown in.
Well, speaking of all the different spiders, T.txt points out that the movie has a whole bunch of different kinds. It's not just your average generic spider monster.
Oh no, they've got everything. Orb weavers, trapdoor spiders, those jumping spiders, even that giant male orb weaver with
With the
yeah,
personality.
Yeah, we'll just say he's got a lot of
A
personality.
lot of personality.
But having that variety is so important for keeping the movie fresh and engaging. Each spider brings something different to the table,
Oh, totally. It's like each species presents a new challenge for the characters. They got to figure out how to deal with each one differently.
Exactly. Keeps the audience guessing. And honestly, it just shows how creative the filmmakers were.
You can really tell they're having fun with it, coming up with all the ways these spiders can terrorize a small town.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
And it brings us back to that humor we were talking about earlier. Even with all the crazy spider stuff, the movie never forgets to be fun.
Absolutely. They managed to walk that line between horror and comedy so well. It's like they're in on the joke with the audience. They know it's a little over the top, but they want everyone to enjoy the ride.
Yeah. It's that self-awareness.
There's this one scene I love where Chris, David Arquette's character, is trying to convince the sheriff about the spiders, that they're like giant and mutated.
Right.
And the sheriff just looks at him and says, completely deadpan. Spiders the size of SUVs. You've been out in the sun too long, son.
Oh, that's great.
I love it. It's moments like that that make this movie so much fun to watch.
It's that balance, the horror and the humor together. That's why people keep coming back to watch it.
So let's recap. We've got nostalgia, we've got humor, amazing visuals, tons of action, all these different spiders, and even some deeper themes about community and courage. Eight-Legged Freaks really does have it all.
Yeah, it really does. And we haven't even touched on how it might have influenced those more recent creature features, or if the mix of practical effects and digital effects still holds up today.
Oh, that's a great point. I'd love to get your take on that. But first, I wanted to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the film's lasting appeal. Why do you think Eight-Legged Freaks, with such a crazy premise, has resonated with audiences for so long?
I think it comes down to sincerity. It's not trying to be more than what it is, which is a fun, over-the-top monster movie.
Yeah.
And it celebrates those B movies we all love while still being its own thing. It's honest, and I think people connect with that.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's that sincerity plus just how entertaining the movie is.
Yeah.
That's why it's become a cult classic. People keep coming back to it, and it's always finding new fans.
You know what? For a movie about giant mutated spiders, that's pretty impressive.
It's pretty amazing how Eight-Legged Freaks, a movie that, first glance might seem like just pure popcorn fun, can lead to some really interesting conversations about filmmaking, genre tropes, even the evolution of special effects.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think it really shows how the movie works on these different levels. You can just enjoy the ride, but you can also appreciate the craft, all that goes into making a great monster movie.
Speaking of craft, you mentioned earlier how Eight-Legged Freaks might have influenced those more recent creature features. Could you talk a little bit more about that? What do you see as, its impact on the genre?
Well, I think Eight-Legged Freaks is a really good example of how to blend those practical effects with the digital ones, even when you don't have a ton of money to throw around. The filmmakers really made a choice to use CGI strategically, to enhance the practical stuff, not replace it. And I think that's an approach that really speaks to filmmakers today.
Yeah, you're right. We've seen this resurgence of practical effects in monster movies lately. And I think Eight-Legged Freaks might have something to do with that.
All right.
It showed that you don't need a massive budget to make creatures look believable and scary. It's all about being smart with your filmmaking, creative problem solving, and knowing how to mix those different techniques.
Exactly. And it's not just about the effects themselves, it's about how they fit into the story. In Eight-Legged Freaks, the effects serve the story. They make the suspense better and even the humor, but they never take over. It never overshadow the characters or the heart of the film.
Right. And that brings us to that balance between horror and comedy, which we've talked about a bit. It's tricky to get right, but Eight-Legged Freaks does it so well.
Oh, yeah. It's like walking a tightrope, but they pull it off. The humor never undercuts the horror, and the horror never, steps on the humor's toes. They work together, and that's what makes it such a great experience for the audience, thrilling and hilarious at the same time.
Do you think that's something missing from, a lot of monster movies today? That mix of horror and comedy?
I think there's definitely room for more monster movies that are, lighthearted, a little self-aware even. Not every monster movie has to be dark and serious and, grim. Eight-Legged Freaks shows that you can have both and that it can be super effective.
It's like the movie knows that sometimes the best way to deal with something scary is to laugh at it a little.
Yeah.
And by being funny, it makes it more engaging for the audience, easier to connect with.
Totally. It lets us deal with our fear of spiders, maybe even laugh at it a little bit. Reminds us that even when there are giant mutated spiders running around, there's still room for a bit of fun.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Eight-Legged Freaks,
Yeah.
what's the one big thing you hope our listeners take away? What makes this movie worth watching again, or even for the first time?
I think Eight-Legged Freaks reminds us that great entertainment doesn't always have to be super serious or, pretentious. Sometimes the most fun movies are the ones that embrace how ridiculous they are, give us a good escape, and leave us smiling when it's over.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. Don't underestimate a good monster movie, especially one that's as smart, charming, and entertaining as Eight-Legged Freaks. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and never be afraid to take a deep dive into whatever fascinates you, no matter how many legs it has.